A trio of Chief Technology Officers joins me now. FEMA CTO Ted Okada, USAID CTO Sukhvinder Singh, and Software AG Government Solutions CTO Chris Borneman. Thanks all very much for joining me. Ted, I want to start with you. Sure. Tell me what you're doing in the DevOps area at FEMA right now.
Yeah, so the idea in DevOps is simply high-speed release. And for us at FEMA, because we do disasters, right, we don't have the luxury of time. We don't get time back in a disaster. So really at the high level, it's about how do we get solutions out faster. And so how do we meet the mandate and the priorities of the administrator who says we have to prepare for catastrophic disasters. And so in order to do that, how do we get measurable, scalable, repeatable, manageable processes out the door much faster? And so developer operations, or DevOps, really gets us there.
Sukhvinder, I imagine you don't have the urgent timeline of every project like Ted does at FEMA, but certainly there is an urgency about the projects you're working on. Tell me how DevOps influences that.
Oh, absolutely. We have a couple of different strategies going on, like on Microsoft Azure Platform as a Service, where we are developing most of our custom applications. We are using the entire VSTS stack to do CI/CD and the DevOps piece. Whereas we have some older applications, they are kind of deployed and developed on our in-house or on-prem infrastructure. There we are actually doing some other tooling and automation and also integrating with the Azure PaaS.
Chris, what's on your plate as far as DevOps goes?
Sure. One of the customers we're working with today is Department of Labor's Office Workers' Comp program. It's a major program where they're revitalizing its 4 legacy programs into one major solution set that can service all groups, which is overall federal employees, workers' comp for energy, longshoremen, and black lung. And so their first project is focusing on the black lung, which they process about $1 billion of claims every single year. And they're doing it with a DevOps fashion. So they're doing 9 releases, or about a third of the way through, and DevOps has really helped them to realize, are they delivering the right solution fast enough and properly, and that as they rotate it through the environments, that they have confidence with DevOps that it's actually going to be the same thing that they developed against.
What's your sense of why they chose to go in that direction? And I want to hear why you're choosing, gentlemen, each of you, to go the DevOps direction in your agencies. But what's your sense of why labor went that way rather than a more traditional approach that we've seen before?
Yeah, I think probably based off the history that they've had with the 4 other programs that they had, is that they got to the point where they couldn't maintain what they had built. And they really looked at it would be better just to build one new platform and then learn from those prior limitations and have one that can go through and continuously change. And so that was kind of a part of the evaluation process.
Sukhvinder and Ted, is sustainability and maintenance a kind of a factor that you think of when you apply this concept of DevOps, Sukhvinder?
Yes, and I think for us, like the time to market is also a big factor, or driver. Predictability, quality of our software, deployments. So, I mean, those are the major, I guess, benefits that we seek, out of DevOps.
When you came into government, Ted, you were very forceful about driving FEMA towards solutions that the private sector had been using. You didn't see very much in government, DevOps, Agile, and so on. Take me through some of the early days of that and some of maybe the resistance points, the pain points that you ran into in trying to introduce DevOps and similar types of concepts to government.
Yeah, so it's always about risk, and the attenuation of risk in government. Alan Mulally, the chairman of Ford, once said, you can't manage a secret. And you often found systems that were in maintenance mode that never got addressed because there were these operational priorities. And so in our case, we had some 10 or 15 financial systems that kind of did the same thing. And in effect, that was just increasing the risk. And sometimes you'll find catastrophic failure. So in order to prevent that, you have to address the technical debt that produces. And the only way you can really do it is to really jumpstart the ability to release at high speed. And a lot of it comes out of more just systems thinking. Harry Truman once said, there's nothing new in the world except the history you don't already know. And it goes back to a lot of the early days of computer science of how to actually do things like site reliability engineering and an engineering mentality. In fact, the concept of site reliability engineering is something that Google pioneered. So this very modern, very successful company actually started DevOps, right? So they were the seed for this. And by really applying, starting from the ground level, where are your data centers? How fast is your network before you even begin to write code? And then looking at software as a mere extension of how you've engineered the entirety of the system. That's really the beginning. And from there you go into, okay, now how do we release at high speed and get the effective authorizations you need to do that?
Sukhvinder, from the scenario that Ted lays out, it sounds like there's a logical progression here for automation at some point. Are we ready for automation in DevOps yet, or is it maybe too early for that?
No, I think absolutely. I'm like, just to share some metrics on our end, it used to take like 8 to 12 hours just to create, a basic development environment, for example. With automation, we have seen that metric, come down to 30 minutes in some cases. And the predictability, and the quality, obviously because of the less intervention from the human, kind of a touch, and the teams. So you have everything automated, and what triggers the next step, and everything just flows through. It's very predictable, from the quality point of view. And I think for us, as I said before, the key is the fast, fail, agile approach. That gives you shorter time to market. And obviously better efficiency and reduce cost. That certainly plays the role.
Chris, final thought for this part of our conversation. These gentlemen really are not in the software development delivery business. They're in the mission delivery business. And that's ultimately what this is all about, isn't it? Tie together the DevOps concept with agencies delivering mission better, like you talked about with the Labor Department.
Absolutely. What we've seen is that the agencies have gone through and deployed DevOps, that they are much more mature, that the repeatability, I think, is absolutely critical, that they typically don't have. We've seen a lot of other projects in the past who have done their procurements and everything's great, but their projects stall because they can't get the environments right, they can't quite test it out. In DevOps, a little bit more up front to get it set up properly, but then it accelerates everything on the back end side of it, and so it's definitely successful.
DevOps goals like moving software more efficiently from ideas to production or better mission delivery sound great, but ultimately agency IT leaders will need to execute at scale. We'll pick things up there next when the Technology Leadership Series DevOps continues.
The mandate for the federal government is clear: modernize IT. Sounds easy, but can be a challenge for agencies, especially those with aging IT infrastructures. Software AG's WebMethods digital business platform seamlessly connects systems, processes, data, and devices in the cloud and on-prem. Learn why so many federal agencies and Global 2000 corporations rely on Software AG to better achieve their most critical missions. Visit softwareaggov.com.
Welcome back. I'm Francis Rose, and you're watching the Tech Leadership Series DevOps on the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. So far, we've covered DevOps projects at FEMA, USAID, and Software AG Government Solutions. Here, our panel steps back for a look at culture and DevOps execution at scale. Here again, FEMA CTO Ted Okada, USAID CTO Sukhvinder Singh, and Software AG Government Solutions CTO Chris Borneman. Ted, you talked a moment ago about coming into government from the outside, seeing that they were not leveraging these concepts like DevOps and Agile and others as well as they could. Once you planted those seeds, what did you see as far as uptake? First of all, willingness culturally, and secondly, scaling them to get people to see that this was not something that just had to be small little projects. This could be something that could be enterprise-wide.
Yeah, so this idea of cultural change is central to this, and I think the not the trick, but the technique was to tie it into how emergency management actually functions. So, when you have a disaster, you have something called an operational period. So every 24 hours, there is this sort of rhythm of the business where you have to report back, you break up in teams, set your priorities, get the work done, and at close of business, you kind of report back. And it's called an O period. And every emergency manager from A local fire department is familiar with that, a county emergency management, all the way to a big state like Texas or Florida. And so this idea that you are taking a large problem and breaking into small sprints or scrums, and there's a lot of these sort of buzzwords that go along with agile programming, it starts there. And then once you get that feel of, this is no different than incident command and what we do in emergency management, then there's a mental realization that, okay, this can work. And how do we apply that to software, and that was that's how we're going to scale that culturally.
So that was the main connection then, was demonstrating this doesn't work any differently than another aspect of our mission delivery.
That's right, something like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sukhvinder, one of the great things about working in government is you can do all different kinds of missions at all different kinds of agencies. You have experience at the U.S. Mint. How does something like that experience tie into or inform the way that you go about USAID in the development realm?
So I left US Mint in 2010, 8 years ago. So it was not really a DevOps kind of a concept back then, right? But I think a lot of lessons that you learn, in just typical software development can certainly be applied anytime, So even though the two agencies, they are very different in the business and the mission, I'm like the greatest lessons that I learned and I applied, just to make sure, especially in USAID, because we are all over the world, and mostly not so sophisticated areas, in Africa, for example, where the latency of the network can be a challenge. So the performance of our application doesn't matter whether you use DevOps or whatever other methodology, it has to be crisp, like it has to respond to the user's need. Second is you need to deliver what your customers need, So I think with the DevOps and the agility, kind of the methodologies and approaches that we see, it certainly helped, apply a lot of those lessons, from US Mint to USAID kind of environment. Just to share an experience, we just moved our data center, and it sounds funny. I'm like, we applied some principles, especially in the culture side, of DevOps to move a data center, because there were a lot of resistance between the actual project that's moving the data center and the operation team, because again, it's a new technology, especially if you're doing the cloud migration. So what we actually ended up doing, actually break down the whole activity, set into backlog, and we ran actually 2-week sprints to move the data center, and it took, I guess, first few sprints where there was a lot of hesitation, a lot of suspicion, people thought it's not going to work. I think towards maybe third or fourth sprint, they kind of started seeing the results, that everything is working, people are talking to each other. If there are issues, they are getting resolved. Their daily, meetings, and there is a retrospective done, every 2 weeks. So you just apply those lessons to the next sprint. So I'm like, it's not an example, it just really worked for us, and then I think some experience that I can draw from US Mint certainly help, just to deal with the people.
Chris, the challenge that I hear about the most from people like Ted and Sukhvinder across government is, we want to do these concepts, we want to partner with companies who know how to do them in the private sector. We don't have an acquisition team that really understands the best way to go about doing this. What have you seen as the best solutions there to help get these solutions into government and still navigate the acquisition process appropriately?
So the best approaches we've seen is kind of bifurcating your requirements. First, in terms of the functionality, what's the business need or the mission need that you're really trying to address? Then secondly is to make sure you focus on the delivery of that solution time. A lot of times we'll see RFPs that come out and they just focus on, here's what I want, but they don't focus on the total cost of ownership, how I'm going to maintain it, how I'm going to sustain it. We're starting to see that shift where it's actually being specified, so we can articulate that. Then make sure that when you do go across that approach, you assess your own group and your own agency. Can you internally adapt into that? And are you trusting your partner to be able to deliver against it? There's more than one technology that comes together to do DevOps properly, so make sure you have a full eye to that whole suite.
Chris, Sukhvinder, Ted, thanks all very much for joining me. I appreciate it, gentlemen.